inherited disease. So, next, what is inherited or genetic disease? The genetic disease is a disease with genetic factors as the source or main cause. Then this disease are called genetic disease or disorder. So, metagenetics is a comprehensive subject to study the characteristics and rules or origin and occurrence, pathological mechanism or pathological process and clinical relationship. It's including the diagnosis, treatment, and prevention of this genetic disease transmitted from parent to offspring by using the theories and methods of human genetics. So the metagenetics is we use the theories and methods of human genetics then to diagnosis or treatment or prevention of genetic disease we met. In our medical genetic class, we will learn about the knowledge of first, I will introduce some knowledge of the medical genetics to you. Then we will reveal some knowledge of classical genetics. And then we will learn the gene and the gene mutation. It is the basic of genetic disorders. And then we will learn the main part of the medical genetics is a single gene disorder, complex disorder, population genetics, mitochondrial genetics, and the single gene disorder is the main part of metagenetics. In this class, we will learn about the transmission pattern of single gene disorder and its types. And the single gene disorder types, for example, the autodominant disease and the autosomal recessive disease and X-linked disease or Y-linked disease. Because all the genes is on the chromosome, so after we will learn the structure of the types of chromosome and learn some chromosomal aberrations. And last of our class, we will learn some knowledge of the genetic diagnosis and counseling. Because you are clinical students, and then use the knowledge of the medical genetics. What can you learn from the medical genetics? And with the knowledge of medical genetics, what can you do in your future work as a doctor? Then you will learn some. After the genetic diagnosis and counseling class, then you will have some ideas. Now we will learn some knowledge of the basic concepts of medical genetics. First is the human genetics. We know we use the human genetics theory and approach to treatment the genetic disease. And what does human genetics? What is human genetics? The human genetics mainly studies the genetic traits of human beings from the perspective of race and human development history, such as the measurement of human body shape and the characteristics of human race. Meanwhile, it extensively studies the variation of morphological structure and physiology functions such as the color of hair and the shape of ears. Clinically, these mutations do not interfere with or destroy normal life activities, and their clinical significance is not significant. For example, their family, maybe the mother and father, can have the rolling tongue.
Meanwhile, the existential studies the variation of morphological structure of physiological function, such as the color of hair and the shape of ears. Clinically, these mutations do not interfere with or destroy normal life activities,
On the
and
human
their
traits, for example, the bend of the thumb
significance is not
and the
significant.
color of hair or the embryo, or if does your ear have the earlobe or not. These phenotypes or traits are all the study contents of human genetics. Next concept is the clinical genetics. Because you are clinical students, so clinical profession genetics, so this the clinical genetics is major
field of science focus is
and you care most in the medical genetics. The clinical genetics is a field of science focusing on the prevention, diagnosis, and treatment of genetic disease. So, after learning the medical genetics, you must want to learn the knowledge of the prevention, diagnosis, and treatment of genetic disease. So in our future class, you will learn main knowledge of the genetic disease. The clinical genetics contains the diagnosis of genetic disease, the prevention of genetic disease, and the treatment of genetic disease. The diagnosis of genetic disease includes the symptom diagnosis. You can see the symptom of the patient, and then you will have some ideas what disease the patient have. And you can use the imaging diagnosis and also the molecular diagnosis. All these methods can use to help you to diagnose the disease, what disease the patient have. Then you can give the patient the best therapy. Then the clinical genetics focus on the prevention of genetic disease. The prevention of genetic disease can, before you want to have a baby, you can go to the hospital and to detach your body, and when you are in pregnancy, you can also detach your baby, whether your baby is healthy. Or maybe some genetics have no symptom, but you must always some genetic disease have the relationship with environmental or your food. So you should pay attention to your habits in your daily life. This is all the prevention of the genetic disease. And then after the treatment of genetic disease, you can use the gene-pick or the individual-based treatment. So maybe this is all the work of a genetic counselor. Last is the genetic medicine. In many cases, the genetic medicine equivalent is equivalent to clinical genetics. With the development of human genome research and its clinical application, genomic medicine comes into being, which focuses on molecular diagnosis, molecular treatment, and molecular prevention of disease. So, in many cases, it is equivalent to the clinical genetics. Maybe you have learned some knowledge of the history of genetics. The history of medical genetics has many relationship with the genetics. The most famous man is Mendel. It documents the patterns of heredity in pin plants. Then is Morgan and his fly room colleagues confirm the chromosome theory of heredity, and the Muller shows that X-rays induce mutations. And in 1980, In 1928, Griffith's transmotion experiment transformed non-pathogenic bacteria strains to pathogenic. And in 1944, Erie and McCarthy showed that DNA is a transforming principle responsible for heredity. And in the most famous and the last one is in 1953, Watson and Crick proposed a double helix structure of DNA. And then in 1990s, the genome sequencing process began. That really revolutionized the medical genetics. And medical genetics has become the main body of the molecular medicine in the 21st century, but the heaven's season of molecular medicine has not yet arrived. At first, I told you that the medical genetics study the genetic disease. So next we will learn some systematic knowledge of genetic disease. What is genetic disease? A genetic disease is a series of diseases that need a certain genetic basis for its occurrence and is passed on to the offspring in a certain way. So the genetic disease needs a certain genetic basis for its occurrence and passed on to the offspring in a certain way. And this a certain way we will learn at our single gene disorder class. The genetic disease have 5 characteristics. The first is the mode of the transmission of disease. It's a propagation. So the genetic disease transfer from father to child in a family. So it is a vertical propagation, is not the propagation. The horizontal propagation mainly because through the environmental. Then is the quantitative distribution of genetics. The genetics have a certain proportion of patients to normal members in a family. And through the specific quantitative relationship, we can understand the genetic characteristics and then calculate the incidence of this disease. Or some advice for his baby. And many genetic disease is congenital. For example, the albinism and the Huntington disease. These diseases are congenital, and the albinism is autosomal recessive inheritance disease, and the Huntington disease is autosomal dominant inheritance disease. So, the albinism patient is afraid of sunlight, and the Huntington disease is a progressive neurodegenerative disease causing uncontrolled physical problems and mental deterioration. All the genetic diseases have the familiar nature. So, when you diagnose a patient as have the genetic disease, so you can ask her his father or grandfather or more, or with his children. Then you get a pet family. Then you can learn some knowledge of this genetic disease and give him some advice for his children. Because as the knowledge we learn about the genetic disease, it means that the genetic disease is a vertical progression. So maybe most of the genetics have no infective, but a little genetic disease has the infectivity. For example, the human brain disease, it is hereditary and infectious disease. The human brain disease is a spongiform encephalopathy disease caused by the PRP gene mutation. It has some types of disease, for example, the CRU disease, the CGD disease, and the GSSD disease, and the FFI disease, the fetal familiar insomnia. According to the course of the genetic disease, the genetic disease can be classified as single gene disorder, the polygenetic disorder, and the chromosome disorder, and somatic cell genetic disorder, and mitochondrial genetic disorder. So we will learn the single gene disorder. The monogenetic diseases are diseases caused by mutation in a single gene. They include the autosomal dominant disease, autosomal recessive disease, and X-linked dominant and X-linked recessive disease. The sick gene disorder is rare, but because of its heredity, so this harm is very great. The Huntington disease, the achondroplasia, and the Marfan syndrome, and so on, is a single gene disease. So we must pay attention to the genetic disease. Because of its heredity, its harm is very great. So now, when a woman is pregnant, she must do many tests to confirm his baby is healthy. And the second one is the polygenetic disorder. The polygenetic disease have family history, but there is no single gene trace of category as seen in the single gene disorder. The polygenic disease contains congenital malformation and a number of human diseases. For example, the hypertension, the the diabetes, and the Alzheimer's disease, the intelligent developmental disorders, and so on. And the environmental factors play varying degrees of role in the occurrence of such disease. The environmental factors include the living environment and the food and oil around you will meet in your daily life is the environmental factors. For example, in the diabetes and the hypertension, we know that the food is very important for disease. The third one is the chromosome disorder. Chromosome disease is a kind of disease caused by abnormal chromosome structure on marble. Essentially, these disorders involve changes in the structure or marble of one or more genes, and therefore, they tend to be more harmful to the individual than single gene or polygene disease. The most common chromosome abnormality is the Down syndrome. Because of the 21st chromosome becomes 3. And other chromosome aberration is the Turner syndrome and triple X chromosome syndrome. So the chromosome disorders may be by the delay of one chromosome or the duplication of one chromosome. So it is more harmful than single gene and polygene disease. First one is the somatic cell genetic disorder. In the classical genetic disease, the somatic cell genetic disorder is not included in the classical genetic disease. But you must know some knowledge of the somatic cell genetic disorder. The genetic abnormalities of monogenetic or polygenetic and chromosome disease occur in the DNA of cells of the body, including the germ cells. Then this disease can be passed on to the next generation. As for the somatic cell genetic disorder, it only occurs in specific somatic cells. The somatic gene mutation are the basis of such disease. So this includes the megalogenesis, leukemia, autoimmune disorders, and aging. The somatic genetic disorder is a mutation of the somatic gene. For example, the cancer. The cancer maybe can be genetic or most of these diseases, somatic cell genetic disease, are caused by the environmental. Maybe some bad food or bad environmental situation. Then we will learn the detailed knowledge of gene mutation in our next class. The first one is the mitochondrial genetic disorder. The mitochondrial inheritance is the mother is passed on to the next generation through the mother. So if the father is affected, then his children will not get this disease. The mitochondria is an important organelle in the cell. It is the only organelle that contains DNA except the nucleus. It has its own protein translation system and genetic code. So the mitochondrial genetic disease are diseases caused by the mitochondrial DNA defects. The most common, the most famous mitochondrial DNA defect is the liver hereditary optic neuropathy. It is disease that affects the eyes with a low neuropathy. And the transmission of the mitochondria is a mother related. And in a second picture, we can see if some mutant mitochondria in the patient body. After the mitochondrial amplification, and some cells may have no mutant mitochondria or have little mitochondria, then it will have no symptom of this disease. And if the cell in the patient, in a human, has a high level of the mutation mitochondria, then it will affect this disease. As we talked about in our before class, we know that the disease have many relationships with environmental. So the relationship between the occurrence of disease and the genetic factors or the environmental factors. Maybe the disease is completely determined by the genetic factors, or it depends entirely on the environmental factors. Some disease is basically genetically determined, but also requires certain environmental triggers. And both maybe some disease must need the genetic and environmental factors in the pathogenetics, but the heritability varies in different diseases. There are some disease caused directly by the genetic factors. For example, the syndactylia and the Down syndrome and placido hypertrophic muscle dystrophy. This disease are completely determined by genetic factors. And also there are some diseases basically genetically determined, but also requires certain environmental triggers. For example, the phenylketonuria disease in single gene hereditary disease. Early people only know that it is related to heredity. Now, humans know that eating food containing the phenylalanine amount to induce this disease. The disease abbreviated as PKU disease. But when you control your food, then you can avoid this disease. The glucose 6-phosphate dehydrogenase deficiency disease, also known as the broad bean disease. In addition to genetic basis, only after eating the broad beans or taking the oxidizing drug primer, the amino quinoline will induce this disease. Will use the hemolytic anemia phenotype, then induce this disease. So if you don't eat broad beans or some specific triggers, then you can also avoid this disease. Both the genetic and environmental factors plays a role in the pathogenesis, and the heritability varies in different diseases. The magnitude of the effect of genetic factors on the disease is different. For example, in the cleft lip, the cleft palate, and mental developmental disorders, the heritability rate is more than 70%, indicating that genetic factors are more important to the occurrence of this disease, but the environmental factors are also indispensable. And the occurrence of congenital heart disease and certain diabetes, the environmental factors play an important role, while the genetic factors play a smaller role, with less than 40% heredity. However, there must also be this genetic basis for its incidence. It also some diseases that only depends entirely on the environmental factors is mainly referred to the infectious disease such as the 29 nCoV and the avian influenza, the SARS, and some tremor, and so on. But the process, the disease process, or the repair and the outcome of this disease may be related to individual genetic types. For example, if you have a good body or your immune system is very good, so maybe you have lighter phenotype according to the 2019 coronavirus. At last, the medical genetics. After learning the medical genetics, you will have some knowledge about the consolidation, the diagnosis, and treatment of genetic disease. So maybe you can have some knowledge as a genetic counselor. Then, after genetic counseling, the electroencephalogram and the echocardiogram detector or the blood test, then we will have some knowledge of this patient's disease. Then you can have the idea of this disease. Is it a genetic disease or not? Then you can give the patient some advice to treat this disease. Or you may also give some advice for his future children, even his father or mother. So Today, this all the contents for today's class. Today we main focus on some knowledge of the what knowledge you will learn in methodogenetics. Then the detailed knowledge of every part you will learn in our future class. So today's class is over. Do you have any question?
No, 老师。我问题，老师。
Okay.
No, 老师。
So today our class is over.
你看老师。
Okay.
好的，老师。谢谢老师。
谢谢老师。
谢谢。
Welcome.